The low murmur of the creek had been the only constant for 100 years. It was the whisper of the past, the heartbeat of the land, a living thread connecting me to my father and his father. Then, the new neighbor arrived. He saw it not as a legacy, but as an obstacle. He heard its song not as music, but as a nuisance. And in the silent, grinding rage that followed the roar of the concrete mixer, a new current was born, not of water, but of vengeance, and it was about to find its way home. The creek had a name, not on any map, but in the soft, worn leather of the family Bible, Otter Creek. My great-grandfather, a man who believed the land had a soul, had given it that name. He said the otters would bless the farms, bring in good luck and healthy crops. For 100 years, it was more than just a waterway. It was a vein, pulsing with life, carving a path through the rolling hills of our property and then on through the land that lay beyond, the land that had just been sold to Victor Thorne. I remember the day the for sale sign went up. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind that smells of wood smoke and damp earth. I was out with my dog Rufus, a shaggy, golden mutt who loved to splash in the shallow eddies of the creek. We watched as the sign, a garish red beacon, was hammered into the soft soil near the old oak tree. A shiver ran down my spine. The land had been owned by the same family for 3 generations, a quiet, respectable couple who knew the rhythm of the seasons and the sanctity of the creek. Now it was up for grabs. Rumors spread like wildfire through our small, rural community. A developer from the city had bought it, a man with money and plans to build a modern estate. We'd all heard stories like this before, gentrification reaching its long, grasping fingers into the countryside, tearing up the old for the sake of the new. But I never thought it would happen here, not on the border of my family's land. With Otter Creek flowing right through it, then Victor Thorne arrived. He didn't just arrive, he descended. A gleaming black SUV, a team of surveyors, and a whirlwind of activity that felt like a violation. He was a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in clothes that looked like they'd never seen a speck of dirt. He wore sunglasses that hid his eyes, giving him an air of detached superiority. When he finally spoke, his voice was a practiced, smooth baritone that grated on my ears. "Elias, is it?" he'd said, extending a hand that felt cold and lifeless. "Victor Thorne, we're going to be neighbors." I shook his hand, my calloused fingers feeling alien against his smooth, soft skin. "Otter Creek runs through this land, Mr. Thorne. It's a protected waterway." His smile was thin, almost a sneer. "I'm aware of the ordinances. Elias, don't worry. I have a team of environmental consultants. We'll be managing the stream to mitigate erosion and maximize flow. It's all perfectly legal." The words felt like a physical blow. Managing it, what's there to manage? The creek's been flowing fine for 100 years. "Progress, Elias," he said, patting my shoulder as if I were a simple-minded child. "It's about making things better, more efficient." He started his improvements almost immediately. The old gnarled trees along the creek bed were the first to go, their ancient roots that held the soil together ripped out by a brutal excavator. The air filled with the screech of chainsaws, a sound that felt like a death knell. I watched from my porch, a cup of coffee cold in my hands, as the natural canopy that shaded the creek disappeared, exposing the water to the harsh sun. Rufus whined beside me, sensing my distress. I tried to fight back. I called the county environmental office, a friendly woman named Sarah, who I'd known since she was a kid. I explained the situation, the clear-cutting, the threats to the creek's delicate ecosystem. She listened patiently, her voice full of sympathy. "Elias, I'm so sorry," she'd said, the words a knife in my gut. "He has all the permits. He's approved to clear that vegetation. His permit even allows him to alter the stream bed for stormwater management, as long as he follows the plans submitted. There's nothing we can do, but the creek, it's a living thing," I pleaded, the desperation raw in my voice. "I know, Elias, I know. But he's technically not destroying it. He's just controlling it. That's what the permit says." Controlling it. The phrase haunted me. It was like saying you were controlling a wild animal by caging it. It was a lie, a word used to sanitize a desecration. The day the concrete trucks arrived, I felt a kind of cold, hollow dread I'd never known. The roar of their engines echoed through the valley, a sound of industry and destruction that felt completely out of place. I watched as they backed up to the creek bed, a steady, gray slurry of liquid concrete pouring out of their spouts. The first section of Otter Creek, the part that flowed through Victor Thorne's property, was slowly, methodically being entombed. The vibrant living water disappeared beneath the thick, suffocating gray. I stood there, unable to move, a helpless witness to the murder of a 100-year-old legacy. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked down to the edge of my property line, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The stench of wet concrete was a chemical insult to the clean, earthy smell of the woods. The low gurgle of the creek was gone, replaced by a dull, muffled groan from beneath the newly paved-over section. It felt like standing at a grave dot. My mind replayed Victor's face, his condescending smile, his dismissive wave of the hand. "Progress, Elias. It's about making things better." He saw a problem, a wild, untamed thing, and he paved it over. That's what people like him did. They didn't coexist with nature. They dominated it. The despair I felt was a heavy blanket, a crushing weight on my chest. I had lost. I had tried to reason with him, to appeal to the good in him, and it had been a wasted effort. He didn't care about the land, the history, or the creek. He only cared about his grand, modern house and his paved-over driveway that would now lead directly to his front door. But as I stood there in the dark, my hand clenched into a fist, the despair began to curdle into something else, something hot and sharp and dangerous. I remembered a conversation my grandfather had with me when I was a boy. He'd talked about the old ways, how a man had to know his land, know its secrets. He'd pointed out an old, overgrown drainage ditch. On the far end of our property, a forgotten channel from a storm a century ago. The land always remembers, he'd said. The water always finds a way. I walked back to the house, the cold anger giving me a new energy. I went to the old wooden desk in my study, the one my grandfather had built. I pulled out a tattered county map from the 1920s, a relic from a time before paved roads and city developers. I spread it out and traced the path of Otter Creek with my finger. I found the faint, dotted line my grandfather had shown me, the old overflow channel. It was dry now, a relic of a time when the creek's flow was higher, before a new dam was built miles upstream. But what if the flow wasn't the problem? What if the problem was the obstruction? I remembered the exact location of Victor's new house, the concrete slab they'd poured for the foundation. He'd built it low, right into the hillside, the way people from the city do, trying to integrate with the landscape. He had a 2-car garage at the back, below the main living level, dug right into the slope. It was the lowest point on his entire property, the path of least resistance. A slow, terrifying thought began to form in my mind, a dark seed taking root in the soil of my righteous anger. The creek's water, now trapped beneath the concrete ceiling, would build pressure. It had to go somewhere. The old overflow channel, the one my grandfather had pointed out, was on my property. It was completely legal for me to maintain the drainage on my own land. I closed my eyes and saw the image clearly. The new, pristine creek bed, the paved-over horror, Victor's arrogant house. The water would be forced to find a new path, and I would show it exactly where to go. The land always remembers. The water always finds a way. I went to the shed, the cold metal of the shovel feeling heavy and righteous in my hands. The old map was still on the desk, the dotted line, a silent accomplice in the moonlight. I walked out into the darkness, not toward the creek, but toward the old, overgrown drainage ditch on the far side of my property. I would clear it out. I would deepen it. I would open a path for the water to remember where it used to go, and then I would wait for the next heavy rain. The first shovel of dirt was an act of absolution. The second was a promise. Elias plunged the worn metal spade into the soft, loamy earth of the old overflow channel. The sound a dull, satisfying thud in the night. The anger that had been a burning coal in his chest now felt like a cold, focused steel blade. He wasn't just digging, he was restoring a memory. He was giving the land a voice again, a path to remember. The old ditch, a forgotten scar on the landscape, was choked with decades of fallen leaves, tangled roots, and gnarled underbrush. It was hard, back-breaking work. Sweat beaded on his brow, and the muscles in his back screamed in protest. But he ignored the pain. Each scoop of dirt, each severed root, was a small victory against the silent, concrete tomb Victor Thorne had built. Fist sat nearby, his ears perked, a silent, watchful companion in the moonless night. As the channel began to clear, Elias could feel the land's old contours. He was following a path that had been carved by the hands of nature and the memory of water. He worked until the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. He stood, his body aching, and looked at his work. The ditch was now a clear, deep groove, a new riverbed waiting for its destiny. He had connected the natural path of the creek, just before Victor's property line, to this old overflow channel. The new path would now lead directly down the slope, away from the main road, and straight toward the lowest point on Victor's property, the 2-car garage. He went inside, showered the dirt from his body, and collapsed into bed, a deep, exhausted satisfaction finally washing over him. He slept the kind of heavy, dreamless sleep that only comes after a day of honest labor and a night of quiet vengeance. The storm came 2 days later. It wasn't a gentle rain, it was a fury. The sky turned an ominous charcoal gray by midday, and the first fat drops hit the tin roof of his porch with a sound like gunshot fire. The wind howled through the trees, a keening lament. Elias sat in his living room, a cup of hot coffee in his hands, watching the spectacle. He felt a nervous anticipation, a mix of fear and grim satisfaction. This was it, the moment of truth. He knew that the paved-over section of the creek would act like a dam. The water, unable to continue its natural course, would begin to back up, building pressure, and when the pressure became too great, it would seek the path of least resistance. The path he had so meticulously cleared, he could almost hear the gurgling groan of the water as it began its new journey. By the second hour of the downpour, he saw it. A muddy, brown trickle appeared at the top of the newly cleared channel on his property line. Within minutes, the trickle became a stream, and then a small torrent. The water heavy with rain, and the soil of the upstream hills was flowing with a furious energy, a living thing unleashed. It plunged down the slope, following the path he had given it, a dark, muddy arrow aimed directly at Victor Thorne's house. He went outside, standing on his porch, a strange, exhilarating chill running through him. The creek's song, though a new one, was back. It was a roar now, a powerful testament to the fact that you couldn't simply erase nature. The water always found a way. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh and clean, scrubbed by the storm. Elias walked down to the property line. The old creek bed on his side was a raging, muddy river, its path now completely defined by the channel he had dug. On the other side, Victor's paved-over creek bed was slick with a fine layer of mud, the concrete, now a dirty gray. But the real masterpiece of his quiet, legal revenge lay beyond. He walked to a vantage point on a small rise and looked down. At Victor Thorne's house, the brand-new, gleaming black SUV was parked on the concrete driveway, but the garage doors were open, and from the darkness within, a new creek was flowing out, a river of muddy, debris-choked water, gushing from the garage and pooling on the driveway. He saw Victor then. He was standing on the lawn, dressed in a pristine white shirt and expensive-looking slacks, now splattered with mud. He was shouting into his phone, his face a mask of furious disbelief. A team of workers, the same ones who had poured the concrete, were now standing around the garage door, looking helpless. The irony was exquisite. He had paved the creek to control it, and in doing so, he had invited it into his home. I waited for the confrontation. I knew it was coming. The moment Victor's initial shock wore off, his rage would turn on me. He would see that the new, raging river on my property had a new, deliberate purpose, and he would know, in his gut, that I was responsible. An hour later, a furious pounding on my door made Rufus bark. I opened it to find Victor Thorne, his face red with a mixture of rage and frustration. His shoes were caked in mud, and a fresh coffee stain bloomed on his white shirt. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses. His eyes, a cold, hard blue, were narrowed to angry slits. "What the hell is this, Elias?" he spat, gesturing with a trembling hand toward my new, gushing overflow channel. "You've rerouted the creek. My garage is a goddamn swimming pool." I leaned against the doorframe, a calm I hadn't felt in days settling over me. "I haven't rerouted anything, Victor. I simply cleared out a 100-year-old overflow channel on my own property. The land remembers, you see, and the water always finds a way." His face contorted in a sneer. "Don't give me that folksy bullshit. You did this on purpose. This is a clear violation of something, of my right to manage my own land," I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "The county office gave you permission to alter the creek bed to mitigate erosion and maximize flow. Well, I just did the same thing. I'm mitigating flooding and maximizing drainage on my property. It's all perfectly legal, Victor, just like your concrete." The prompt air crackled with tension. He was a man used to getting his way, used to his money and his lawyers smoothing over every inconvenience. But here, on my porch, in the mud, in the aftermath of his own hubris, his power felt hollow. "This isn't over, Elias," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're so smart? I'll see you in court. I'll sue you for every penny you have. I'll make you regret the day you ever touched that shovel." I simply smiled, a genuine hard-won smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'll be waiting, Victor, but you might want to call a plumber first. Or, better yet, a carpenter. Looks like that brand-new garage door is starting to swell." He turned and stormed off, his footsteps heavy and furious in the mud. He didn't look back. I watched him go, a sense of both triumph and dread filling me. He was right. It wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I had won the first round, but I had awakened something far more dangerous than a paved-over creek. I had awakened a man's wounded pride and his bottomless well of vengeance, and I had a feeling he wouldn't be playing by the rules. The game had just begun, and the stakes had just been raised far higher than a 100-year-old creek. The air, scrubbed clean by the storm, felt heavy with the silence of a pending threat. For 3 days, Elias existed in a state of suspended animation, his ears tuned to the sound of a strange car on his gravel driveway. The town, a place where news traveled faster than a creek in a storm, was already buzzing with the story. Elias, the quiet farmer, had stood up to the city developer, and for a moment, he had won. But everyone knew a man like Victor Thorne didn't lose. He regrouped. He retaliated. Elias spent the time working, an attempt to channel his anxiety into something productive. He mended a fence, sharpened his tools, and walked the perimeter of his property a dozen times, his eyes scanning for any sign of a new offense. The old overflow channel, now a proper, gurgling tributary, flowed with a steady, brown current. It was a beautiful, defiant sight. It was also a beacon, a clear and present reason for Victor's impending legal firestorm. On the third afternoon, a sleek, unmarked black sedan pulled up to his mailbox. It wasn't a mailman. A man in a dark suit with a briefcase got out, a stark and formal figure against the rustic backdrop of Elias's farm. Elias met him at the end of the driveway, his heart a drum against his ribs. "Elias Finch?" the man asked, his voice clipped and professional. "That's me. You've been served." The man handed him a thick envelope, the seal of a high-powered law firm embossed on the front. It was heavy with the weight of paper and the promise of ruin. Elias took it, his fingers feeling numb, and watched the sedan pull away. Rufus, sensing the tension, nudged his hand with his wet nose, a soft, comforting presence in the face of this sterile legal assault. Elias went inside, the envelope in his hand feeling like a block of ice. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands trembling slightly, and sat down at his kitchen table. He took a deep breath, ripped open the envelope, and began to read. The words were a foreign language, a calculated assault of legal jargon and financial figures. He scanned the pages, his eyes skipping over the dense paragraphs, searching for the core of the attack. Then he found it. It wasn't just a lawsuit for damages, though. That was in there. A number so astronomical it made his stomach clench. $500,000 for catastrophic property damage and structural impairment. The real heart of the document, the tactical strike, was a motion for an immediate and permanent injunction. The lawsuit claimed Elias's unauthorized and malicious rerouting of a natural waterway constituted a public and private nuisance, posing a severe flooding risk to neighboring properties and creating an unmitigated environmental hazard. The legal argument wasn't that Elias had damaged Victor's property with his water. The argument was that the channel itself was illegal. The injunction, if granted, would force him to immediately fill in the overflow channel, restoring the damming effect of the concrete and allowing Victor to continue with his construction unimpeded. It was a genius move. Victor wasn't fighting the flood. He was fighting Elias's legal right to create the drainage in the first place. His head swam. He had been so sure of his legal footing, so confident in the precedent of his grandfather's memory, but he was just a farmer with an old map, up against a man with a team of lawyers and unlimited resources. The battle he thought he was fighting was a different one entirely. The next day, Elias drove to the county office. He found Sarah at her desk, her expression a mix of professionalism and genuine concern. She knew why he was there. The legal papers had already been filed publicly. "I'm sorry, Elias," she said, her voice soft. "I saw the filing. He's going for the injunction. It's a smart play. But the creek was 100 years old. And the overflow channel, it's on a 1920s map. My grandfather, I know," she said, cutting him off gently. "But 100 years of memory isn't a legal precedent. Your grandfather's map isn't an official survey. And that overflow, channel, hasn't been a functional part of the watershed for decades. Legally, the only thing that exists is Victor's permit. It was approved. He followed the letter of the law, and I didn't," he asked, a bitter edge to his voice. She hesitated. "You didn't file a permit, Elias. You didn't get a professional survey. You didn't get an environmental impact report. You simply dug." He's arguing that what you did was a malicious, unapproved alteration to the land, not a legal act of drainage mitigation. It's not about the water, Elias, it's about the paperwork. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. It was such a simple, devastating truth. He had fought a battle of principle with a man who only saw a battle of documents. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. The words barely a whisper. Sarah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "You need a lawyer, a good one, and you need to find an angle. Something he missed. Something about his permits, his construction, the way he built that house. Something that proves his whole project was flawed from the beginning." As Elias drove home, the countryside felt different. The hills, once a source of comfort, now felt like a legal battlefield. He was alone, outmatched, and facing a war he couldn't win with just a shovel. Victor Thorne was an opponent who didn't fight with brute force. He fought with cunning and paperwork. And he had just landed the first, crushing blow. That evening, staring at the thick stack of legal papers, Elias felt a new kind of despair. Not the quiet sadness of watching his creek get paved over, but the cold, paralyzing fear of being outmaneuvered. He had underestimated his enemy. The game had not just begun, it had moved to a different field, one where he was completely unprepared. He had to find a way to get back on his feet, to find a weakness in Victor's armor, something that his money and his lawyers couldn't pave over. Because if he couldn't, he wouldn't just lose the creek, he would lose everything. The legal papers were not just a threat, they were a siege. They lay on Elias's kitchen table, a sterile white mountain of jargon and legalese. He had spent the last 2 days poring over them, trying to make sense of the intricate web of claims and demands. The $500,000 lawsuit was a sledgehammer, but the injunction was the more insidious weapon, a legal chokehold designed to suffocate his act of defiance. Every time he looked at the clear, gurgling water of his new channel, he knew Victor was watching, waiting for the courts to make him fill it in. The fear was a constant, low-level hum in his mind. He was a man of the land, a man who understood the language of soil, weather, and crops. He didn't speak the language of law firms and litigation. He knew that without a powerful legal ally, this was a battle he was doomed to lose. He called the one lawyer he knew in town, a kind, elderly man who handled wills and property lines. The conversation was short and polite. The lawyer's voice, full of sympathy, confirmed his worst fears. "Elias," he'd said, "you're out of your league. This man has hired a firm from the city. They'll bury you in motions and paperwork. My advice. You need to find a way to compromise. But there was no compromise to be had. Compromise for Victor Thorne meant Ilias's surrender, his creek's memory buried forever. The thought filled him with a cold, hard resolve. He might be outmatched, but he wasn't going to just give up. Not yet. He remembered Sarah's words at the county office. You need to find an angle, something he missed. Something about his permits, his construction, the way he built that house, something that proves his whole project was flawed from the beginning. It was a desperate hope, a whisper in the wind, but it was all he had. Elias set the legal papers aside and pulled out his phone. He had to become his own investigator. The first step was to get his hands on the same documents Victor Thorne had filed with the county. He drove back to the county office, a place that now felt less like a hub of local governance and more like the headquarters of his enemy. He found a clerk at the front desk, a young woman who looked tired and overworked. I need to see the public records for the Thorne property, he said. Which one? The new one on Cedar Creek, she asked, not looking up from her computer. Otter Creek, he corrected, the name a sharp, painful memory. I'm looking for the permits, the survey, the blueprints, everything, she sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and pointed to a set of shelves. It's all in there. Just fill out the request form. Have to make copies yourself though, 50 cents a page. The blueprints were a revelation. He spent the next 3 hours hunched over a large table in the back of the office, surrounded by stacks of paper. He had to squint to make out the tiny, precise text and the intricate lines. He saw the stormwater management plan that Victor had so condescendingly mentioned, a series of drainage tiles and gravel beds designed to channel the water away from the house and into a designated runoff area. It all looked perfectly legal, perfectly planned. The plan was, in fact, so meticulous and detailed it seemed foolproof. But something about the blueprint for the foundation of the house itself snagged his attention. He held the blueprint up to the light, tracing the lines of the foundation with a calloused finger. The drawing showed the foundation being poured at a specific elevation, a foot higher than the natural grade of the land at the lowest point, a necessary step to protect against minor flooding. He remembered standing there, watching the construction. The foundation had seemed much lower than that, almost flush with the slope. A tremor of excitement shot through him, a jolt of adrenaline that cut through the weariness. He was not a surveyor, but he had worked his land his entire life. He had an innate sense of grade, of slope, of elevation. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that the foundation was lower than what was specified on the official plans. He spent another hour copying every single page of the document, including the environmental impact statements and the engineer's seal. He didn't just copy the blueprints, he copied the entire file, from the initial application to the final stamped approvals. He felt like he was gathering evidence for a crime, and in his mind, that's exactly what this was. That evening, with the sun setting, he went back to the edge of his property and stared at Victor's house. The new garage doors, a deep, dark mahogany, were now closed, but the memory of the muddy flood was still fresh in his mind. He looked at the gentle slope of the land, the way it dipped and curved down towards the lowest point, where Victor's house was built. He was convinced. The man had cut corners. He had built the foundation lower to save money, to make his house look more integrated with the landscape, and in doing so, he had created a perfect floodplain for a creek that had nowhere else to go. This wasn't just a matter of Elias's creek, or Victor's arrogant project. This was fraud. Victor had lied to the county, and he had built his house illegally. It was a secret, a vulnerability, a weakness that a man with all the money in the world couldn't pave over. He had a choice to make. He could turn this information over to the county, a public bureaucratic act that would likely get bogged down in more paperwork and lawyers. Or he could confront Victor with this knowledge himself, a dangerous personal act that would escalate their conflict beyond anything either of them had anticipated. He had a feeling that the man who had paved over a creek wouldn't take kindly to having his illegal construction exposed. Elias looked down at the documents in his hand, a newfound confidence settling in his chest. He had found his angle. He had found a chink in Victor's armor. Now, he had to decide how he was going to use it, knowing that whatever he did next would be a move in a high-stakes chess game where the loser might lose more than just a lawsuit. The battle of documents was over. The battle of wits was about to begin, and the consequences, he knew, would be far more personal and far more final. The decision was made not with a grand declaration, but in the quiet, resolute hardening of a man's heart. Elias didn't need a lawyer to tell him what was right and what was wrong. He held the thick file of blueprints and permits, a paper shield against Victor Thorne's wealth and influence. He could go to the county, but he knew how that would go. More paperwork, more lawyers, more delays, all while the injunction against him moved forward. No, this was personal. Victor had stolen 100 years of history from him, and he wasn't going to fight this battle on a field Victor controlled. He was going to take the fight to Victor's front door. He waited for the next morning, the sun rising on a deceptively peaceful landscape. The creek gurgled its new song, a defiant, constant reminder of what was at stake. He put on a clean work shirt, his best pair of jeans, and drove his old pickup truck down the road to Victor's property. He felt the weight of his father's and grandfather's legacy behind him, a quiet, unseen army. Victor's house looked even more out of place in the daylight. It was a monolith of steel and glass, its sharp angles an insult to the soft, rolling hills. The new mahogany garage doors were closed, but the dark, muddy stain on the concrete driveway was a testament to the creek's righteous flood. Elias parked his truck and walked to the front door, the heavy file of documents clutched in his hand. He pressed the doorbell, a chime so delicate and melodic it felt ridiculous in this context. Victor opened the door himself, wearing an expensive, silk robe that looked as out of place as his house. His face, still pale with the anger of their last confrontation, hardened when he saw Elias. "I told you this wasn't over," Victor said, his voice low and menacing. "My lawyers are handling it. You'll be hearing from them very soon, and you won't like what they have to say." "I've already heard from them, Victor," Elias said, holding up the legal papers he'd received. "And I have something I think you'll want to see." He held out the file of county documents. Victor's eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine surprise in them. He took the file, almost snatching it, and flipped through the pages with a practiced, quick hand. He scanned the blueprints, the permits, his own engineer's seal. As he reached the page detailing the foundation's elevation, his face went from surprise to a mask of cold fury. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. "That, Victor, is your fraud," Elias said, his voice steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "Your blueprints say the foundation was supposed to be a foot higher than the lowest grade. It's not. It's almost flush with the slope. You built your house in a floodplain to save a few bucks, and you lied to the county to get your permit. And now the water has found the mistake you made." Victor slammed the file shut, his face white with rage. "You have no proof of this. You're not a surveyor. You're a backwoods farmer with a grudge. This is slander. This is harassment, and I will have you arrested for trespassing." "The proof is right there," Elias said, gesturing at the house behind Victor. "The water doesn't lie. The land doesn't lie. And I've got all the paperwork right here. I'm not here to get you arrested, Victor. I'm here to tell you that if you don't drop the lawsuit against me and fix what you did, I'll turn this entire file over to the county, and I'll make sure every news station in the state knows about it. And when they do, you won't have to worry about a flooded garage. You'll have to worry about a condemned house and a ruined reputation." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Elias saw the gears turning in Victor's mind, the quick, calculating assessment of risk. He wasn't a man who fought fair, but he was a man who understood leverage. Then, Victor did something Elias hadn't expected. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and a cold, chilling smile spread across his face. "You're a clever man, Elias," he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "You've done your homework, and you're right. I did cut a corner, a small one. I needed the house finished quickly, and the ground was a little soft, so we laid the foundation slightly lower. But you don't understand the game you're playing, or the pieces on the board." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This house is more than just a home, Elias. It's a stepping stone, a launch pad. I've got a deal in the works with the county council, a land development deal that will make this entire valley a new, exclusive community, a modern estate, just like you heard. And the final piece of the puzzle is this land right here, your land. Elias, minute development needs this property to run the main water and sewage lines through your century-old easement. My project, my legacy, is contingent on me owning this land." The words hit Elias like a physical blow. He wasn't just fighting for his creek, he was fighting for his home. The lawsuit wasn't about the flood. It was about tying up his property in legal red tape, making him desperate enough to sell. Victor's smile widened, a cold, predatory grimace. "You see, Elias, you thought you found a chink in my armor, but you've just walked right into my trap. You can expose my little foundation problem. You can get me a fine. You can even get my permits revoked. But by the time you do, I'll have enough leverage to take your land anyway. And when I do, I'll fill that old creek bed of yours, and I'll pave over your land. And I'll put a sign on your property that says, Elias Finch Memorial Park. You think you have me, but you don't. I'm just getting started." Victor's words hung in the air, cold and sharp as a winter wind. He wasn't just a rich man. He was a shark, and Elias had just swum into his jaws. The lawsuit wasn't a battle. It was a distraction, a legal net meant to entangle and weaken him until he was forced to sell. The thought of his father's farm, his grandfather's land, all of it turned into a modern estate with an Elias Finch Memorial Park sign, made his blood run cold. "You're wrong," Elias said, but the words felt hollow. "You can't just take a man's land." Victor laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I'm not taking it, Elias. The county will. You see, an easement for a public utility line is a public good, and when the county determines that a public good requires your land, your personal rights become a minor inconvenience. I'll make sure the council votes yes, and when they do, you won't have a choice." He leaned in one last time, his breath a foul whisper. "You fought for your creek, but you're going to lose your land. And your legacy." Elias turned and walked away, the words echoing in his mind. The truth was a physical weight, crushing him. He had been so focused on the creek, on the small victory of the flooded garage, that he had missed the entire war. He had been so proud of finding a chink in Victor's armor, only to discover it was an exposed nerve in a much larger, more monstrous beast. He drove to the county office, a man on the brink of despair. He found Sarah, the friendly clerk, and laid the entire story out on her desk, the file of blueprints and permits as a centerpiece. He explained the foundation fraud, the land deal, the injunction, and Victor's grand plan. He spoke with a quiet, furious desperation, his voice a low monotone of a man who had nothing left to lose. Sarah listened, her face growing grimmer with every word. She looked at the blueprints, comparing them to the permits, her eyes widening as she saw the discrepancy. "Elias," she said, her voice a hushed whisper, This is a felony. He filed a fraudulent permit. If the county knew about this, his entire project would be dead in the water. The permits would be revoked, the construction would be halted, and he'd be facing a huge fine. What about the land deal? The easement? Elias asked, his heart in his throat. She tapped her fingers on the desk, her mind racing. The proposal is on the agenda for the town hall meeting next week. He's presenting it to the council for a vote. But a deal like that, for a public easement, it requires a clean record. This kind of fraud would tank the whole thing. The council would never approve a deal with a man who lied on his permits. It would be political suicide. A sliver of hope, sharp and cold as a shard of ice, pierced through Elias's despair. Victor had been right. The game was bigger. But in his arrogance, he had revealed the entire game board. He had given Elias the chance to play for the ultimate stakes. The town hall meeting was packed. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and damp wool. Victor Thorne stood at the front of the room, a charismatic figure in a bespoke suit. A large projection screen behind him showing gleaming computer-generated images of his modern estate. He spoke of progress, of new jobs, of revitalizing the community. The county council members listened attentively, nodding their heads. It was a slick, professional presentation, a masterclass in salesmanship. Elias sat in the back, the heavy file of documents on his lap. He felt a tremor of fear, a wave of self-doubt. He was just a farmer, a man with a shovel, not a lawyer or a public speaker. But then he remembered the low gurgle of the creek, the weight of his family's legacy. He stood up. "I have a question," he said, his voice surprisingly loud in the hushed room. Victor's smile faltered. He saw Elias and his face went white. "The gentleman is out of order," he said to the council. "He has a personal dispute with me. It has nothing to do with this matter." "It has everything to do with it," Elias said, walking to the front of the room, the crowd partying for him like the Red Sea. "Mr. Thorne wants to bring you a new community. But a man who can't be trusted to build a single house correctly can't be trusted to build a whole community." He laid the file on the council table. He pointed to the blueprints, to the foundation, elevation, and then to a grainy picture he had taken of Victor's new house, its foundation clearly sunk into the slope. The room went silent. The council members leaned in, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. "He filed a fraudulent permit," Elias said, his voice now ringing with authority. "He built his house in a floodplain. And when my creek did what it's done for 100 years, he tried to sue me, not for the water, but to seize my land. This whole thing, this development, is a lie. It's built on a foundation, a fraud, just like his house." A low murmur started in the crowd, a sound that quickly grew to a roar. People began to shout, their voices filled with outrage. The council members, their faces grim, began to confer. Victor stood there, his slick facade crumbling, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He was exposed. He was undone. Justice? It turned out, wasn't a court ruling or a lawyer's argument. It was a town hall meeting. The council voted to table the development plan indefinitely, pending a full investigation into Victor's permits. The injunction against Elias was immediately dismissed. Victor's house, still a testament to his greed, was now a monument to his failure. A flooded, legally compromised shell of a building. Elias walked out of the town hall, not with a feeling of triumph, but with a quiet, profound sense of peace. He went back to his farm, back to the creek. The water, now a clear, clean flow, sang its ancient song, unburdened. The land, having remembered its history, had found its justice. And Elias, having fought for his creek and his home, knew that some things, like family, and history, and the natural flow of water could never truly be paved over.